my boat was too big. It was like,
We
we
left
could
for
get it by
the
bike.
Expo Planning Commission.
Grab part, just part of
We went to Durango, Colorado, and it was just blazing hot everywhere we went. Oregon, Tri-Cities, Idaho, Utah. We came across that bear cat, it was just.
Actually, probably look at our office meeting. Is anybody interested in talking about this? I have a couple other people in the office. You change it, but 3 or 4 people involved in the office. Other than that,
If that's where they come from, then it's big. No, we got some minutes up there.
that's what, yeah, I knew it would be.
No, because I knew there was gonna be a concern. I thought that somebody knew.
I'd like to call the meeting to order this evening, the City of Oak Harbor Planning Commission, regular meeting, July 25th, 2017. Let the record show that all of the commissioners are present except Commissioner Mann. Second item on the agenda this evening is the approval of the June 27, 2017 minutes. Do I have a motion?
I'll make the motion to approve the minutes, June 27, 2017, regular business meeting.
I second the motion.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Approval of the minutes passes. The next item, as is with every meeting that we conduct, we accept public comment for items not otherwise on the agenda for the first 15 minutes of the Planning Commission meeting. I see folks in the audience. Do I have any takers this evening? Seeing none, I'll close that part of our evening. Next is public hearings and meetings, and the first item on that is the countywide planning policies amendment, and this will be a public hearing. And Development Services Director Steve Powers will walk us through this evening. Steve?
Thank you, Chairman Wassinger, members of the Planning Commission. I think it also was our intention to make note of that item 4C was not going to be heard this evening. We're moving item 4C, transportation concurrency, to the August 22nd meeting. In terms of the countywide planning policy amendment item, we've talked to the Planning Commission on a couple other occasions about this. We've briefed you about our work ongoing with the county, and so here we are before you this evening for the required public hearing on this. Let's see. Spacebar or enter? Spacebar, not so much. Nope, I just did enter. Maybe that'll do it. So by way of background, you might recall we adopted the countywide planning policies in the format that you see them this evening. In early 2016, Planning Commission was a big part of helping the council get to that adoption. It did a lot of good things in terms of clarifying process. One of the more significant things is it established a new process for calculating the buildable lands analysis or buildable lands area. That's all about capacity in our urban growth area, as you well know, but that was really one of the hallmarks of that particular effort. But we also knew going into that effort that given the significance of it and the amount of rewrite, that there would be some things that we were going to have to revisit once we started utilizing them. And to their credit, the county recognized that fairly early on, and so we started working with them towards the tail end of 16 on some potential things that we should look at revising. and they distributed their first draft in April of this year. We gave them back some comments at the staff level in May of this year, and then that's really when we began our briefings with you and the City Council in earnest. Yeah. There we go. As a reminder, the relationship, or where do countywide planning policies fit into the Growth Management Act land use planning scheme? We put together this graphic that we hope is helpful for you. If we think about GMA as the overarching principle that we're working under, you can think of countywide planning policies as the next step down, because that's our agreement between the city and the county about how we're going to tackle things of mutual interest. Sort of off to the side are interlocal agreements that help us do the details of how we're going to have that arrangement. But then under the countywide planning policy umbrella, we see that's where we get the basis for our comprehensive plan. It helps us inform that planning effort with the things that we're going to do jointly with the county, and the things which are solely ours and the things which are solely theirs. Related to that, again, off to the side of this particular graphic, you see the concept of joint planning areas and urban growth areas, which you're very familiar with. And then finally, the last piece of this as we work our way down this upside down pyramid are the development regulations. And as you've heard us say on more than one occasion, your development regulations have to be consistent with your comprehensive plan, and your comprehensive plan needs to be consistent with the countywide planning policies, and the whole darn shoot and match needs to work with the Growth Management Act. Neat graphic that Lisa put together for us before our council briefing, our last council briefing, was just kind of a graphical way to remind us that we're not in this alone, and even we're not in this alone with the county. Coopville and Langley are also an active part of this process. And so one of the key tasks when you're doing this is to write things which will work for all jurisdictions in a particular fashion. So this is just a gentle reminder to us that all 4 jurisdictions on the island actually adopt these countywide planning policies. In order for the amendments to take effect, all 4 jurisdictions will need to adopt the amendments as well. This map is a reminder about really what the countywide planning policies are all about. It shows the city limits, which is in the shaded pale yellow, the urban growth area, which is that yellow plus the shaded back purplish color, and then the JPA is the area outlined in the dark black, and then the different colors inside of there are those areas which we've worked to identify with the county as either priority growth areas or auxiliary growth areas. And as you know by reading the document, those terms have specific meaning. A big part of what these amendments did was to clarify those meanings and make them be a little more workable and or match up better with RCW and WAC language, which covers this slide fairly well. 4 main areas of changes that have been proposed. We've talked to you about them in depth before. Definitions, the goal was greater consistency with state law and state administrative code. The joint planning area, sort of rethink the way we categorize that, think a little bit better about what criteria we use to decide whether something should be in the JPA or not, and if so, what sort of priority is it assigned in terms of its possibility of moving into an urban growth area, and some refinement into the policies. Speaking of urban growth areas, changes there incorporate the new definitions that were referenced above, and then a greater clarification of how do lands move from the joint planning area into the urban growth area when we may need that capacity for additional growth. And then finally, the buildable lands analysis, as you know, is what tells us whether we're going to need that room or not. And so one of the things that we've worked to do is to refine some of the assumptions that go into that model. Again, our ultimate goal is to have a model which is as accurate of a predictor as what we can of our capacity, but also represents our on-the-ground conditions in Oak Harbor and in Island County. And that's the last bullet point there, is that they are intended to better represent real-world conditions. Where we are in this process, obviously with the Planning Commission, we're asking you to conduct a public hearing this evening. If you were to make a recommendation for approval, we've already got this thing queued up for City Council action tomorrow at their workshop. But as you always know, we tell you, if you're not ready for something, you tell us that, and we'll work with you to make sure that you are. So the date tomorrow is in no way, obviously, something that we have to hit if you have questions that we can't answer this evening. So finally, our recommended action is that you conduct your public hearing, and then that you recommend approval of the amendments to the countywide planning policies dated May 30th, 2017. I'd be happy to help you with your questions.
Steve, I know that we've been going through this for some time and that staff has been working with the county based on the presentation and the documents that's before us. The changes that have been made are in concurrence with county and city of Oak Harbor.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, staff is very comfortable with the language that we have in this document. And as I indicated in our pre-meeting, we arrived at that collaboratively with the county. This was actually very easy to go through this process, and I think the ease of this process was directly related to the time that we spent in crafting the countywide planning policies in 14 and 15 and adopting them in 16. So that groundwork made this part a piece of cake.
Good.
Al?
Just a clarification on process. I mean, my understanding is all these documents were produced by the county, so we didn't really, I mean, these aren't from our office, right? They're from the county. Specifically, I'm looking at the matrix.
The matrix was produced by the county, but we utilized it because we thought that it was an excellent tool to show the changes.
So my question, I guess, is in this packet, we have something called the matrix proposed changes 3.0. In the last month's meeting, it wasn't called changes 3.0, but the actual document itself doesn't seem to have substantively changed. Is that just they made some errors possibly in the first document? And
No, Mr. Hovey, there were changes. And I should be able to point those out to you if I can.
I guess the fundamental part of the question is the matrix 3.0 has obviously come out since our June, whatever it was, 22nd meeting, but the date on the planning policy is still May 30th.
Yes, and that is something that the most recent version of the countywide planning policies, which includes the county's updates through late June, has a May date on the document itself, but the file date, and Lisa and I were going through this as we were trying to figure out how we were going to identify the attachments for you. The file date actually has a late June date. So this version of the matrix, there were 2 additional clarifications in the definitions, if I remember correctly, that made this matrix just slightly different from the one we showed you last month.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Steve, the 2 things I had on it was actually just some words that I thought should be left out. And on page 41 of 61, under paragraph 5, where you got the discount, a portion of these based on the sliding scale below provided in section 2.5, remove below, because the sliding scale you're talking about is on the previous page.
Okay.
I know that's, not that important, but still. And then on page 42, section 2, you have the same thing, scale below provided in section 2.5.
I'm sorry, oh, yes, okay. And it's probably because in a previous version, that's where it was. So those are good catches.
And the other thing on page 44, 5.2, and when you say applying the vacant parcels adjustment factor, I would just sit there, if I'm not mistaken, that's in section 2.5. That's back to that table that you were referring to earlier, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yes, I believe that is true. Yes, because it's the partially vacant parcels. And so that is no, I'm sorry.
That's
The
not,
vacant parcel adjustment factor is actually, if you look at page 40 of 61 of our packet, it's item number 9 under 2, under subcategory 2, the assumptions. The vacant parcel factor, to account for vacant parcels that will not fully develop to the maximum density allowed over the next planning period, the capacity calculation for vacant parcels will be reduced by a 10% adjustment factor. That's our collective effort at trying to address the question of timing. Not so much the question of sizing of the parcels that come out of that table, but the question of, okay, yes, it's available, but we have no way of predicting whether you as the landowner would actually develop that parcel within the 20-year horizon.
I got you.
Yeah,
Thank you. That was the only things that I
Okay.
seen, the
Great.
changes I would make.
good catches, thank you.
Any other comments? Now would be the time to open the public hearing for public comment. I will do so. The public hearing is open. Do I have any public comment regarding this proposal? Seeing none, I'll close this part of the public hearing and entertain a motion.
I recommend the city council approve the amendments to this countywide planning policies dated May 30th, 2017.
Do I have a second?
I second.
I have a motion, and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Okay. So, okay, so the next item this evening, Senior Planner Kat Kamak, I believe, is going to take us through the 2017 Comprehensive Plan Amendment, the Park Plan Update. Kat?
Good evening. CACMAC Senior Planner. This is probably going to be one of my shorter presentations about the park plan. So in the past 3 meetings, we had a chance to share with the Planning Commission and the Park Board and the City Council, the last 3 months, I should say, the contents of the existing plan. So we went through the Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3, primarily just to get all the boards and commissions up to date on what's in the plan so that you could be effective in the update and providing input. So we're at that stage. We've completed that, looking at the existing plan. So what's the scope of the update and how do we move forward? That's kind of basically what I want to cover tonight in terms of this process, and not going to dive into any content-related stuff. So, there we go. Okay. So the scope of the update. What do we want to do with this particular update process? So we're going to ask the question about the vision. Does the vision need to be updated for the park plan? We don't have to answer it tonight, but the commission is familiar with the vision. I'm going to ask the same questions to the park board, and I'm going to ask the same questions to the city council as well. And I've got a little discussion about the process, and I'll get to that a little bit. But I'll go over and just cover what we think we can cover in this update. So whether the vision needs to be updated. Minor updates to the guiding principles. The guiding principles are pretty solid policy and goal statements in there that not major modifications are needed. However, we did get a comment or two from the park board that are very good points to include in the guiding principles, primarily related to historic significance. We don't have anything, no guiding principles kind of promoting preservation of historical aspects of our parks. Goals up. I put a check mark. We'll definitely update the goals section. We'll have a discussion on that because eventually, with the adoption of this plan, you want to select what goals you want to accomplish over the next 6 years. So that's a very key part of the discussion. We'll definitely cover that. In Tier 2, we'll update the inventory, we'll reorganize the parks by neighborhoods that we adopted with the land use element in the 2016 update. We'll have some minor discussions about level of service analysis, and especially how it relates to Windjammer Park with the clean water facility, and that all the improvements that are going on there. There needs to be a question and discussion about, what's the level of attention that that park should receive, and whether we have adequate resources to meet the expectations of what people would like to see in Windjammer Park. So we'll have a discussion on that. And of course, through the discussions we've had so far, we know that the trails, the level of service is pretty low. So what should we do about it? Are there other ways to address that? So we'll have a discussion on that. And we'll definitely discuss impact fees. That's with every update, you want to kind of question the impact fees, the methodology, and the amount of impact fees, and what the resulting budget impacts that they can have. And the Tier 3 is the administrative policy, so we'll cover some minor updates on that. So that, generally from reviewing the plan, we think that those are the areas that we could have a discussion and have an update on that. I'm not sure which button here works. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you. So what is the process from here on? So we have one of the suggestions in the plan was to try and use the same survey that you did when we did it in 2009, so that we can kind of compare results. The survey is pretty standard. It covers, the quality and quantity of parks. So we've slightly modified the survey based on our discussion with the commission and the city council. There were couple questions they wanted to have included, or information they liked added to the survey. So we're going to tweak that. The survey is ready. We're doing some beta testing on the survey. It's just basically a SurveyMonkey, kind of an online survey. We'll be probably doing a soft release this week. And then we'll open it up to the public, so we'll have public input on that. What we'd really like to do, in order to save time primarily, is, I can go to every planning commission and park board and city council meeting to discuss all the different issues, but if we have everybody in the same room and talk about the issues, there's more communication and more ideas that may come out of it. So we're hoping to have a joint workshop between the planning commission, park board, and the city council. We're thinking sometime in early September is the time frame we're shooting for. We'll have a chance to talk to the park board and the city council before that. So just look for some emails from us for possible dates to try and organize that. I think that discussion between all the boards will help us narrow down the updates we need to do, or share ideas on what goals we need to accomplish over the next 6 years. And a meeting such as that is definitely will be a public meeting, and it'll be a workshop setting. So if the city council or the combined everybody wants to take comments from the public, we could do that as well. So we have some planning to do for that. Just that's FYI for you. We'll come back and chat with you about that. So once we go through the workshop and identify all the issues, we update the plan, and we'll have a draft plan. We'll do the SEPA notifications. Department of Commerce needs to be notified as well, and then we'll go into hearings and adoption. It must be taking some time to respond. There we go. So what are some of the things that we'd like to discuss? And this is just a starting list of things that we have identified in the workshop to discuss. Again, should the vision be updated, modified, we'll have that discussion. Are there additional goals to add to the existing list? The existing plan has it broken down by parks and recreation and open space, and there's a list of goals underneath that. And there are a lot of goals that still are yet to be accomplished or brought up to the list in terms of priority. So, what do we want to do with the existing list, or should we just work with the existing list, or should we add things to it? I mean, all of that will be open for discussion. From that, we want to also kind of chat with everybody to see what are the projects that should be considered over the next 6 years. Parks projects do take a long time. If it's acquisition of a community park, it usually, I mean, Fort Nugent, I think, took 20 years in the making from plan to implementation. So these do take a long time, and you got to chip at some of these periodically. So we'll have that discussion so everybody's on the same page on what we want to accomplish. And then, the question came up, I think, in Planning Commission and Park Board about the private parks and private trails that are existing in Oak Harbor, and we don't have them in our level of service analysis because they're private and they're not necessarily all open to the public, but they do provide a service, at least for the local subdivision or community. So the question is, do we want to consider them in the level of service analysis? So we'll have that discussion. And then what is the general expectation for maintenance of Windjammer Park? I mentioned that earlier. I think with the new building and new improvements, there will be an expectation. And can we still do that with the existing resources we have? Is a good discussion to have. That's what we need to do, is to think about that. And then, of course, the park impact fee, we want to have a discussion about that. So that's generally a starter for the kind of topics that we have. So I'm kind of opening this out. If the Planning Commission has additional topics or questions that you'd like to see at this workshop, we can just let me know now, or you can email me. And we have one more meeting probably before the workshop, so give it some thought. And if there are things that we can have discussed in that joint workshop, let us know, and we'll incorporate that into the discussion and go from there. So that's basically what I wanted to cover today. Any questions, or do you have any topics that we could add to the scope for the discussion for the workshop?
CAC, I know the discussion the last time we spoke was citizens have made comment about accessing all the parks through trails. We know that that's virtually impossible in some respect unless it's along a public street. That might be an issue that comes up during your survey. And also, when the survey is completed and we've made some decisions, and we start to talk about the park impact fees, how much of that park impact fees is going to go to the Windjammer Park or to these other parks? I think it needs to be discussed as part of this process, because in talking about it and thinking about it, there's a lot of parks out there with a lot of dated equipment in it, and the public might think that, well, here's our chance to get some new equipment, and is that even a reality? Because there are so many small pocket parks. So I just think that just needs to be, people need to be aware of that.
Just as a reminder, I mean, that's a good question, and I think that's a good discussion to have. Impact fees are usually related to development, new development. So as the city grows and you add population, the impact fees are meant to provide services to the additional population that's being added in. We've not to say that we don't have development around our existing parks, but we'll have to be careful in how we assign impact fee dollars to existing parks. We'll have to kind of make that bridge between development being, in that area or something that's being impacted, the park being impacted. So.
And I understand the impact fees, on new development, redevelopment and all of that, but it's, we have the elephant in the room, okay, where majority of the dollars on impact fees are going to that one location because it's not funded, to the level that where we can complete the entire park at this time. So I just think it needs to be part of the discussion.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the park impact fee discussion hopefully will capture a lot of that, and the concerns about, the level of expectation that is there for the Windjammer Park and how much resources. I mean, I think all of that will kind of wrap into, new parks getting attention and what happens to the existing parks and whether we can continue to keep improving them and keep equipment safe and new for them to use. So it's definitely a balance and a discussion worth having to make sure that we're addressing both concerns.
So, CAC, where does the repairing or restoring of the windmill, whether or not we are going to keep the facility for the RVs, is that part of this whole thing also, or?
Probably, I mean, I think the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan is the larger plan. The Windjammer Park Improvement Plan, the WIPIP, which was done
Yes.
last year, has most of the policies and the plans specific to Windjammer. So what we'll do in this plan is we'll make a reference to that plan as being related to, and so we probably can discuss any of the park-related items as part of the park plan update, but I see the windmill and the RV park being more of a Windjammer Park improvement plan discussion as opposed to the larger park plan discussion.
I know from previous discussions and stuff, and I know you've considered and stuff like that. But also, I remember with maintenance has always been a big issue, especially as far as Windjammer in order to upkeep the parks and all the facilities that we have. How is that going? Should that be part of this discussion also, on how are we going to maintain when we put up these new things and to keep them up to standards so we don't have them starting to decay and fall apart and stuff like that like we have in a couple areas.
Absolutely. Our parks inventory section identifies all the kind of life expectancy of some of the infrastructures that we have in our parks, and we've noted where some of the equipment needs to be replaced. I think the commission, park board, and city council all know the value of having these replaced, but from a process and reality standpoint, the parks plan is part of the general fund, which competes with a lot of other services in the community. So even though our park plan and transportation plan or any other plan identifies all the top priority projects that need to be done, when eventually these projects get funneled to the budget, there has to be some decisions made based on the money available. So I think our plan identifies those, and we should continue to identify what is important in all our plans and continue to voice our opinions on what we think is priority. But eventually, when they come to the budget process is when, they decide whether there's adequate resources to address something in a given biennium year. So, but it's good to discuss it to keep the importance of these things up in the plan, but eventually, adopting a plan doesn't necessarily mean that all of it will get done. It's just budgeting is the final call on some of these implementation projects.
Thanks, Kat.
Questions? Thanks, CAC.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. That being the last item, our next regular meeting will be slated for Tuesday, August 22nd, 2017, and seeing no further business, this meeting is adjourned.